Well, hey, Roger, Merry New Year.
Hey, Scott, Merry New Year.
All right.
Merry Christmas, Happy New Year to you.
Exactly. Well, I always think of Eddie Murphy, in Trading Places.
Oh, yes.
Merry New Year. Like, no, we say Merry Christmas and Happy New Year.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm like, okay. Anyway, so how's it going for you, man?
Pretty good. How you doing?
All right.
Good.
Okay, so we're gonna do part two. We're gonna, get right into it because we always want you to know about that. There is a kind of a new thing that we have, guys. I really would love it if you guys would go on and subscribe, pop in there and do that. That really makes a difference for me. I really would appreciate that. Okay. All right, so here we go. So here's the original question. You can always watch part one. It was a week ago. You guys are gonna see this on Monday the 30th. Okay. And so W.D. Wilson says, do you need the law of the land to expose the fraudulent president, then erasing all he did? And so we started with that, that premise point, and Roger took he always does, takes a unique way of looking at this with it too. So we are up to the question of this one here. So how will the upcoming period of trials, in essence, what we're talking about are military tribunals, potentially be handled?
Okay. Before I get into that, I want to go back to the previous question on the law of the land. I think a point that's important to clarify on this, in 1948, I believe it was, the U.S. Congress amended the 18 U.S.C., which was the Criminal Code of the United States.
Right.
And what's in there, they specifically changed that from the law of the land to the law of the land and territorial waters. Which is kind of interesting. So I think that's where some of the confusion's coming from. When do we go back to the law of the land? Because based on that change, the belief is that this is no longer the law of the land, i.e. common law, but it is a combination of the law of the land, law of the waters, admiralty law, and so forth. So, and what's interesting.
Say that again. Like it said what exactly?
They said that they were changing this from the law of the land to the law of the land and territorial waters, which would include things like any territories that we have in the waters around them. It would include the territorial waters we have up to 3 miles off the coast and so forth.
But it's a code, isn't it?
It's code, yes.
Yeah.
But what's interesting is that that's also the criminal code. So, for example, if you look at Derek Johnson, he'll cite 18 U.S.C. And he'll cite different sections in there. So it's a criminal code and a civil code, but it's kind of interesting because they tell you right in there that that is not the law of the land. It's the law of the land and territory. So it creates confusion in people. And I just want to use that as an example of how when the Congress puts laws together, they write them in such a way that they are intended to be confusing and open to wide interpretation. And so, for example, if you look at whether it be something like that or something like the Internal Revenue Code or a variety of other statutes, you have a situation where it says two things. It says this is mandatory, but someplace in there is going to say it's voluntary.
Yeah.
And they'll say that in some places it's not required, but it's a contract when you sign a document stating this is your income under the IRS or the Internal Revenue Code. So for example, you look at the conflict that exists in every law that gets passed by the Congress. And I think that's the most important thing to think about, because what that does is that opens the door for courts to go one way or the other on the different laws we have. And I think we have to keep that in mind if we are looking at trying to disassemble the laws that we have as we move into a period of Nacera, because I believe there's opportunities there where we can sort of legally attack the laws by raising questions over whether or not those laws are actually valid or do they conflict elsewhere in the Constitution.
Doesn't it go down to, but doesn't even go down to like, the 55-mile-an-hour speed limit. Someone will pull you over for 2 miles over the speed limit. Other people go, well, if you're within 5, and there's just like this gray area. So, you never know.
Yes. And gray areas are created intentionally. Okay. With regard to speed limit, I'll just sidetrack on that a bit. When they moved the speed limit from 55 to 70,
Right.
they gave rural jurisdictions the opportunity to pull you over and ticket you anywhere within that gray zone. And they referred to it as an energy conservation ticket. I know I experienced getting one of those one time. So you could say, even though the speed limit is 70 on most roads, or law enforcement will not pull you over until you do 15 over. If you're doing 5 or 6 over and they give you that ticket and they cite you with points and a fine, they always refer to it as an energy conservation ticket.
Wait, you mean like if you're 55 and you were going up to 70 miles an hour, or 68 miles an hour, they would
58
call
or
that.
61, whatever, it doesn't matter.
Oh, okay. So 5 to 6 miles hour over that,
Yes.
right?
Or even up to 15. They have a right to pull you over, but they don't classify it as a speeding ticket, because when they classify it as a speeding ticket, the proceeds of the fine are earmarked to a different location than a local conservation ticket.
Wow, I didn't know that.
So that's again one of the reasons why when you look at laws, they're crafted intentionally with gray areas, so that the public is never certain if they're accused of stepping outside the limits of the law, what they're going to be looking at.
Yeah, and I mean, I think, I've had, major conflicts with people, over mandate versus law, and no one knows what it means other than, the people in this community know what it means, because they know mandate has no teeth whatsoever. It's just, you and I have talked about before, but it's basically, a policy procedure,
Yes.
as long as we agree on it, then we all stay within the boundaries. But if I don't agree on it, they go, someone, the police can walk up and go, well, the mandate says, like, yeah, tell me where that is in the criminal code.
Yes. And see, one of the other issues that I wanted to touch on briefly too was that if we look at, people will make reference to, for example, the 16th Amendment.
Right.
And how it gives the government the opportunity to levy income tax on us. And they use that, and then Congress will write, they'll write a statute that basically says that we have a right to levy taxes on all income, regardless of what source it's derived from. If you go back and look at the articles of the Constitution, it specifically limits what they can levy taxes on. And the purpose of levying taxes is to make certain that they're equally applied amongst the states. And so the 16th Amendment really, all it did was address the fact that it dealt with the apportionment issue between the states based on population, not giving Congress the opportunity to come in and redefine what's taxable.
Yeah.
And I raise that issue because, again, if we're looking at the tax system under NACERA, there are a couple of big gaping holes there that provides an opportunity for a court to go through and provide clarity on that, or even for a Congress to go through with the assistance of the states under our constitutional amendment process to freely get rid of the income tax amendment. So that's things that I believe it's important for people to understand, because that Constitution is a living document and breathing and moving all the time. There's an opportunity for us to make those changes. So
Right.
I just wanted to address that issue before we kind of dove into the others.
Well, and it's such a beautiful issue, because I remember when I was audited more majorly years and years ago, which they love targeting people like me. And even before I was kind of awake to all this stuff. And I remember it was the state government that was auditing me. And I'm like, wait, aren't we talking about federal taxes? And no, they were making it up for the state and the federal. So you always ask this question. I mean, you always pay, other than Texas maybe, but you have a state, a tax rate and a federal tax rate, right? And yet the question always is like, where does the state income tax go to? And it doesn't go to the states. It's never in the state's purview. It's going to the federal government.
And if you take a look at the way the state audits work, in some areas, for example, if you have sale of real estate, the IRS will delegate to the states to conduct the audit of the taxes to make certain that, there's no unrealized gain, that the expenses and everything else within the sale of that real estate were correct. Then if there's any tax to be obtained from that, the state will levy it, and then the feds come back in and piggyback on the state. On the other hand, if you look at the tax form you fill out for the federal government, they go through and do the audit based upon what their determination is, whether or not there's additional taxes owed. They will then delegate, they will share that with the state. So they give the state the opportunity, and in some cases, local income tax authorities. So there's, again, it's one of these things where we have given government, through the vagueness of our laws or the uncertainty of our laws, the opportunity to use those against the people who put the representative government in place, who then delegate to the administrative state how they're going to collect money and take advantage of situations out there. And then we, in turn, through our naivete, continue to reelect people who continue to take advantage of us.
Right.
And essentially put us in a perpetual slave state. So anyway, I wanted to address those issues because I thought they were important. And if you want to go back to the original question, we could easily do that.
Yeah, no, that's totally fine. So, okay, so we'll get into our other thing. The next question on the list is, how will the upcoming period of trials be handled? And we were talking about, so you guys remember, we're talking about, military tribunal stuff and why that was happening. We already kind of discussed that. If you want to watch it, you got to watch the back one. But now we're talking about how will the period of trials be handled, maybe in the military sense.
Well, I think, first of all, before we get to the military sense, we have to realize that the Constitution provides for different levels of tribunals, whether they are administrative or whether they are,
right,
they're Article 2, Article 1 type tribunals. And what happens with this is that the Congress will make a decision if there's a need for some of those. And we've all dealt with different types of those through the administrative state, like a tax court or an EPA hearing. So, those are those types of issues. But what's interesting with the trials specifically that we're talking about that the military would be involved in our country, we have treason laws. And if you look at the treason laws, essentially, the treason laws set up a process whereby if you engage with an enemy of the United States, either as a combatant or as a supporter, you get drawn into the military tribunals. And what's interesting is if we take a look at the basics of how this whole process started, I'll go back to the whole question of stealing an election and breaking that down. Okay, so you have people that are filling out fraudulent ballots. You have people that are transporting and delivering those. You have people that are reviewing the ballots and counting them. You work on up through the process to those officials who were elected as, say, Secretary of States, Attorney General, governors. All of these people have varying degrees of treason against the United States because their whole purpose was designed to overthrow the government of the United States. Then you have another area of those folks who benefited from the treason, and that is the people who won their elected office. And so you've got that category of individuals as well. And then you take a look at things like campaign finance, the whole money laundering idea that's done with Act Blue and some of these other organizations. They're also participants in this activity. Then if you go beyond that and you take a look at the courts in our country, the criminal courts, the civil courts, the many times attorney generals say would go in and claim people from being fraudulent electors or claiming that there was a stolen election when there wasn't. So all of those people have come together in this larger conspiracy to commit treason and to overthrow the government. Now, again, when I say this, I'm saying it because it's the evidence of their behavior that put them in this category. Not because, I've seen firsthand evidence of it, but it's the descriptive behavior of what they've done to do this. Anytime you see somebody who has been arrested for stuffing the ballot box, there's treason. Anytime you hear about someone who has gone out and says, we're going to accept the vote count, even though we know there's been hanky-panky with it, they've engaged in treason. The people that have been identified as creating fraudulent ballots, there's a lot of what I would refer to as independent campaign consultants.
Right.
Their whole purpose was to do things like gather signatures for people running for office, gather ballots for people that are running for office, collecting money, getting large sums of money that come into the United States that are then funneled to these different organizations. And I guess with that part, I should back up. So the way it works in this country, we have campaign finance. So we have people that go out and they raise money. And so the money may come into them from a variety of different reasons. They have a process called, I think it's smurfing, where they actually will take funds and they will look at anyone who may have given anywhere from $1 to $10 for a candidate. And then all of a sudden that individual is now making $25,000 contributions to the candidate because they're tagging them with the laundered money, if you will, that's going to
so
candidate.
they're attaching it like, Scott gives $10 and then sometime later they like attach, a laundered point underneath Scott, for instance.
Yes.
Okay.
And so if you sit and take a look at that, then the question becomes, okay, so is that person an active participant who was the victim of the smurfing? Well, the question becomes, what was their intent? Did they intend to participate like that or did they not? And most of those folks don't intend to do it. They are caught up in this web of somebody using their credentials to be able to make the contribution. But the interesting point is if you trace the money has come from external sources, and it's illegal for a foreign entity or someone who was a non-American citizen to contribute to political campaigns in the U.S. So they have to go through this process of laundering the money, if you will, collecting the money, send it to another source, funnel it back to a 501c4 organization, which is a nonprofit organization that engages in political education. And then that money then is contributed back to someone who is running for office. And they then use that money to pay for their campaign expenses or do whatever they may do related to the campaign. And the interesting thing about those resources that they raised, even though it's laundered money, at the end of their term, if that money has not been used, they can either donate it to a nonprofit, which might be going back to the same organization. They can use it for healthcare expenses. They can use it for paying staff. They can use it for whatever they want to. But this is how most of the people in government today become independently wealthy, because the money keeps running through the different cycles and coming to them in exchange for their willingness to support voting for laws and engaging in activity that will support the administrative state. And so, it's one of those things where when we look at the sealed indictments, a lot of those sealed indictments are going to be for people who've engaged in this type of behavior.
Right.
And then you take a look at what that tier may include. Well, that tier could be expanded out to the point of where some of the recent investigations that have gone on have included things like mortgage lenders, bankers, title companies, individuals who are looking at providing an opportunity for sale and resale of real estate in various parts of the country to launder the money through. You may have individuals who participate in drug cartels that are involved in this. I mean, the amount of corruption and treasonous behavior against the United States is so massive that I don't believe people really understand the scope of what that is and who all's involved in it.
Yeah, but the reality is this stuff has been going on for decades and decades and decades. I mean, some of the stuff we can tie back to LBJ and his campaign in like 1948 for the Senate.
Yes.
Where he clearly was taking votes from the local graveyard kind of stuff. And
Yes.
There's a lot of cover up that he went through. And so that that's just a part of that thing. So what we're talking about is, though, now you've been seeing it ever since, in essence, since 2017.
Yes. And so at that point in time, then the question becomes, okay, so we have to gather these people up. So how do we go about gathering them up? Well, again, because they have engaged in an activity against the United States, they are now an enemy of the state because they try to commit a coup, which they conceivably may have, to overthrow the government, to take power away from the legitimately elected government. Then you have to make a decision, okay, where do we start arresting these people? Do we work from the bottom up? Do we work from the top down? If you work from the bottom up, then you're going to have people who will flip, as you say, on other people and give more in-depth information about how this whole process actually worked. Because I think the public's unaware of the fact how deep this goes, but this has been a long-term, long-time process that has inflicted both political parties. The Democrats more so than the Republicans, but they're all in on it, and that's where we get to the concept of the uniparty, because everybody participates to be the same. It's like a two-headed snake,
Yeah.
you know. Um, they come to the point of where they each will try to represent something, but the entity still moves around as a uniparty. And so you have to identify which of those do we start first. So that's one way to look at it. The other way to look at it is, do we start this process out by identifying a date whereby we're going to begin the process of doing this? And so the question becomes, do we go forward with January 20th as the date? Or is there some type of activity between now and January 20th that would trigger the military to step in and start the process? That's really the unknown that we have right now. And so we have to take a look at how that process might begin. But one of the things I believe we know for certain is that, number one, there will be arrests. And number two, there will be tribunals. And number three, the people that are picked up will end up, if they don't get the death penalty for treason, will end up spending life in prison on a desert island someplace, or Gitmo, or some other place.
Right.
And we have that process going on while at the same time we're engaging in a mass deportation, and we're trying to get our government back in place. So there's multiple activities that are taking place here. And the question becomes, how many of those are we going to see publicly? Are we going to see all the arrests? Will that shift the focus away from what the deep state is trying to do to deny President Trump his inauguration? Or will these all come at the same time? The concept I raised earlier about the oath of office, again, we have to look at people who have an oath under our Constitution, and that in and of itself opens up so many other avenues. Because again, if you take an oath that you will uphold the laws, you will uphold the Constitution and the laws of the United States, and even locally the laws of your state constitution and local government, but
Right.
you have not been doing that, then you're in violation of your oath of office. And so the
Right.
question becomes, what happens once people like this get arrested? And is that something we focus on now, or do we focus on that a little further down the road? Once those people are out of office, then we have to have these new elections. And if we start in particular at the top with the Senate and the Congress, then we look at having new elections. Okay, so the question becomes, and I think it's a valid question, if we know for certain that these people who held office over a period of time, number one, didn't have a legitimate oath of office, and number two, if they did, they violated that oath of office,
Right.
what is the impact on the laws that they passed?
Yeah.
Can those laws be
null and void.
unraveled? More than likely they can. And then we take a look at the judges and courts, and the question becomes, do we go through the Supreme Court to have an emergency action on setting aside statutes that people say we should have? Do we roll back statutes to the point of where we go back decades? Do we say that we're not going to enforce them going forward? There's a lot of different things that come into play, but these all get triggered by the arrests before tribunals even take place, because we know once these people get arrested, there will be a tribunal, and the only question becomes death or life.
Well, so I mean, and I think I know where you land on this, but I mean, I think what most people look at is, they're, especially if they're seeing, the EBS, the EAS as a trigger date, as this thing happens, and then everything goes forward from that, like as a linear kind of motion. The reality is it's way more complicated than that. Most times we've seen supposed justice that they're actually getting the people that do, the dirty deed, right? That they're out there physically doing the dirty deed. They never really get the person who allowed the deed to happen. I mean, the only time I know of that would be the Charles Manson, murders, where he told them what to do, and he got the major penalty against him. Long story with that one, but the people under him also got the penalties. But most time you never get the top people. But what we have all been perceiving happening is that it's coming from both sides of this. The top down and the bottom up. The bottom is telling on the top. The top ones, you have to take out so they don't have any abilities, and the only thing you got is the middle realms of
Yes. And I think one of the important things is, I don't know if you had the opportunity to watch Leslie Stahl on 60 Minutes on Sunday.
No, I didn't.
There was an interview with an individual who represented himself as being from Mossad.
Okay.
And so he was providing answers to questions that she raised. And during the interview, they were talking about the pagers that blew up. And she said, well, how was that possible? And he said, well, we had a factory in Hungary that was under a different name, and they did business with the manufacturer in Taiwan who was under a different name. And nobody ever really knew the backgrounds of the manufacturers in Taiwan or the factory in Hungary. And then we hired, unknowing to this individual, a woman who was going to be the salesperson to sell the pagers to Hezbollah. She was very highly thought of by Hezbollah. So Mossad was in the background working this together and pulling everything together. And so when the time came, then of course the pagers went off, people were killed and injured. And the question that Leslie Stahl raised was, I don't understand, how do you bring this around? And he said, look, we are Mossad. This is like a stage. We are conducting a theater. We know who the players are. We manipulate the actions behind the scenes. We rearrange the stage to get to where we want to be. This is all a movie. And I believe this is what we're looking at right now, because there's several people I know and have worked with over the years who are not around because there's somebody else parading themselves as that person.
Right.
And so the question becomes, okay, if that's the case, I've watched enough movies in theaters to know that there are replacements of key individuals going on.
Sure.
And so I know for a fact that this process has started from the top down. And I also believe that this is working from the bottom up because of certain changes that take place in how they enforce laws and whether they consider it's important to go after things. And so you can see these changes that are taking place. And so we know, if we paid close attention to it, what's actually occurring. When is it going to speed up to the point of where there are mass arrests? We don't know that. But again, with this being a military operation, which I believe it is, we are starting the process to go forward. Even President Trump stated the other day, on January 20th, he will start his second term.
Right.
Not his third, his second. So as Derek Johnson says, the dash represents, the military, and it does.
Right.
Yeah. And so as I look at this, we have a lot of different factors that are coming into play. And so I don't know if there's been mass arrests out there. I see planes going to Gitmo. I see a lot of planes doing drop-offs and takeoffs in a variety of different places. They're using World War II military bases. They're all over. And I see them going from the United States to South America and vice versa. So are we moving people that we have arrested? Are we deporting illegals? Nobody knows, because President Trump said he's not going to give you advance notice when they undertake an operation.
Exactly. No longer will we tell the enemy what we're doing. That was back in 2017, 2018, something
Yes.
other, when he said that. And it was like such a fascinating point, because when you understand what the sicko cabal does, is they have to tell you before they do it, because of the Satanism that they have.
Yes, that is correct. And so, again, as we take a look at this and we look at the tribunals that are coming into play, yes, there will be tribunals. Again, the question becomes, how are those going to be handled? I believe the vast majority of those will be handled at Gitmo. They've got a new courtroom down there. They've got places for, they've got a hospital down there. They've got facilities for people to be in down there. Do I believe they've started? I don't know. I don't have any inside information on that.
Yeah.
I know there's some sources out there that talk about different things, but I don't believe that's the source I would rely on. If it came from the president or from the military, that might be different. But we
all sort of suspect that some of the trials, again, whatever date is, let's say EBS is day one, okay, and you're seeing things happen. The reality is, if you looked at them closely, you'd notice, wait a second, that person's a lot younger than what they seem to look now.
Yes.
And And so guys, don't get too focused. And I think that's what Roger's trying to give you. Don't get too focused on the exact moment in time. The cool part is that it's happening, with that too, right?
Yes, it's happening. And again, will we see public displays of how this goes forward? I don't know. That's up to someone else to decide.
Right.
But the reality is those will take place because they always do take place. And what's interesting is we have not only the military tribunals, but we also have the crimes against humanity with the international tribunals.
Correct.
And that's a completely different thing. So the question becomes, are we looking at the election interference tribunals going on at Gitmo, and then the COVID-19 stuff going on at The Hague or someplace else?
Right.
Off Europe, we don't know. We're not going to know that until someone tells us this is where they have taken place. But I know that there are a number of people who have in the past strongly encouraged their patients to take the vaccine, who are very concerned now that they may open themselves up to both litigation and criminal charges because of those behaviors. So there is this ongoing fear that at some point, someone may be separated from family, from jobs and friends because they engaged in a crime against humanity. We're already seeing lawsuits popping up with people that were injured from the vaccines, class action lawsuits. We're going to see more of those take place from people that were injured and or possibly killed. If you look at our Constitution does provide for punitive damages for people that are injured.
They do.
And so the reality that's what we have to be mindful of too.
Yeah, but some people are focused or on the reality that these vaccine companies can't be liable, and yet the reality is we know that these payments are actually happening as we speak. I mean, we're seeing the payments out there that are going on.
And let me give you an example. Okay, so for those who say that they can't possibly be liable because there's a law here that says you can't do it or a law there, well, what happens? Rather than relying on the law that says they can't be dealt with, what if someone seizes their accounts and then uses them as a claim fund? And again, the military has the authority to do that under 13848, 13818. They have the ability to lay claim to these resources and wealth that people have to compensate those people who were victims of their behavior.
And that's kind of what we all perceive on that too. So yeah, I mean, how are they going to be handled? I mean, really, tribunals are very quick. They're not like these long drawn out month after month kind of thing. They're pretty much, it's done. Here's the evidence. Do you want to say something? Go ahead, whatever. I'm doing the Scott way. But boom, there's, we know what the penalty is, and the penalty is meted out at that phase with that too. So,
and I think the thing that people have to so there's one thing I'll say on the tribunals, at least for the election ones. Okay, if we have a military tribunal that deals with the elections, people are still afforded their constitutional rights up to a point. But again, your freedom of speech, your right against unfair search and seizure, and all these other types of things, right to confront your accusers and what have you, some of those are minimized because the behavior is so egregious. I mean, for crying out loud, how can someone like Fauci sit here and say, I demand to confront my accusers, knowing there's going to be millions of people standing in a line for him to confront? That's just not going to happen because it's not reasonable. So you can have constitutional protections up to a point, but then the military says, okay, we're going to go beyond that. Obviously you did this. Here's the evidence. What do you have to say? And if I was following orders, from whom I can't say, well, then, okay, if you can't say, then that's it. And so, guilty. And they will decide how they're going to merit judgment, either life in prison, death by hanging, execution, whatever it may be, because they committed treason against the United States, but they also may have committed crimes against humanity. And the question becomes, like Fauci, who gets a shot at Fauci? Is it the international court for their crimes against humanity, or is it the military tribunal?
Right.
And then the other part of it is, when there is that kind of an action, what's happening to all the resources that they have amassed over time?
Right.
And that goes into a fund to take care of the victims, because all the victims that have been injured in this will get some kind of compensation.
Right.
I know people have talked about, well, what about relatives that died or things of that nature? Again, that's one of those gray area questions that someone else has to answer. But for those who are alive and who have experienced traumatic injuries, and who are currently living with those injuries, they're going to be treated differently than the folks who have unfortunately passed away. But that's
Yeah,
going to have to be a decision by a higher authority.
right. But I imagine though that there's a there's a correlated number, that they say, here's for death and here's for, levels of injury on top of we're going to take care of you for your life,
Yes.
if you're that severely impaired, kind of thing.
And all
And
I'm saying is somebody else was going to be making those decisions because,
sure,
again, that's going to be a unique decision that gets made. And it's very possible that we can have a situation in this country where, depending on the resources going forward under NACERA, that someone could say, look, we're gonna do a carve out here, and we're gonna take resources and pay the people because of their injuries, and they can make that decision. Again, more than likely a new Congress and
sure.
president, but we don't know that yet. That's too far down the road.
Right. Okay. So let's do our next area. So how will we prove the 2020 fraud? Now, this is pretty easy, but we'll kind of deal with it anyway. What about those not elected but appointed to office? So you sort of have brought this up here, but the appointees.
Yes. So you have a situation where, okay, so we know when we talk about all the elected officials that we have there, members of the Congress, state legislatures, city councils, people like that. All of these different levels of government have the ability to appoint someone to office.
Oh, right.
And so if their position was obtained through fraud, the person they appointed to an office within, say, an administrative state or within the state agencies or even local, their appointment would not be legal because the person who made the appointment of them to that office got there by fraud. So that person would then have to vacate the office. So when people talk about the different levels of American citizens taking back their government, there are all types of opportunities out there that will be forthcoming for individuals who say, look, I'm tired of somebody else being there running roughshod over me. I want to get involved. I want to be on a school board. I want to be on a city council, state legislature. I want to run for Congress. I want to do these types of things because they didn't represent our interests, and I feel I can. And so there's the educational process, but then there's also the understanding that the people that got appointed to offices, how many of these offices do we need to have around? I mean, do we need to have every board from every agency if those agencies are going to be eliminated? But all I'm saying is it's easier to eliminate a board when the people that were appointed don't have an office there. Yes, you can.
And I think we have this issue that has been happening nationwide, just at school boards. I mean, some states will have way less school boards and principals and administrators, and then other ones just have this massive number of, and you're going, it doesn't even fit to the population level with that too. And you're going, do if you're taking down some of those areas, you might just say it's not needed. This person, this group of people can handle this population on an overall basis.
Well, see, and historically in this country, we got to the point of where we created all these special districts, I'll call them. Okay, so we go into an area and somebody says, wow, you've got this huge school district, so we're going to cut it up into 5 school districts.
Right.
Every school district's got to have a school board. They all got to have a superintendent. They got to have separate high schools. And all of a sudden, you're spending all kinds of money to support 5 times the needed administrative system for an education that you may not need. I believe more and more people
kind of thing.
In one county, yes, or one city. And I believe what a lot of people are going to say, wait a minute, we have been so misled by what these special districts education do for our kids. We may decide to homeschool.
Yep.
With the technology we have today, there no longer may be a need for all these districts, all these teachers and everything else, because there's a way to do it differently. So once those go away, they don't come back. And along with that is the taxation to support them.
Right.
So that's why I say we have that multi-level issue of different items to be concerned about. As you start vacating the offices, you take a look at whether they're actually needed. And then you
Right.
have to make a decision. If we don't need them, then how do we shift to doing something different? And again, so you have, using education as an example, you eliminate the education department at the federal level, you eliminate all the multiple school districts at the local level, and then you've got the state education and the state board of education. And then the question becomes, who has the best interests of educating our young people?
Correct.
Locally, state, or federal? And so all of a sudden you're going to say, well, there's no need for a state board of education to do it because we know the kind of education our kids need to have. And so a lot of these positions go by the wayside. And again, this is not something that happens overnight. This is a process that takes place over several years, but it's a process where we work towards greater accountability.
And I had brought this one up here very recently, but here's HHS that has this massive amount of money that I've never seen in my lifetime. An HHS or Treasury go above Social Security and Defense. I mean, it's this unbelievable amount of money that's going into a couple of these amazing things, and you're going, why are you spending money like that?
Well, and I think there's a couple of things to be mindful of with this. First of all, when we looked at the 1,547-page bill that originally was going to be the continuing resolution, what a lot of people don't understand is that there were a number of categories in that bill that extended these agencies from December 24th to March 31st.
Oh,
Those
right.
were all taken out. So right now, all those agencies, they've run out of money. They have no money to spend. So therefore, the question becomes, if they have no money to spend and they've got no way to compensate their employees, why do we need to keep them around?
Yeah.
So
what-
that becomes an agency then that could be eliminated, especially when those agencies have no real purpose in governing.
Well, it's hysterical that they spent probably months and months and months building a 1,500-page document, and then not even days later, we got a 116-page document. If you guys don't see the movie in there, it's not funny. I'm telling you what, I wrote, it's the fastest book I ever wrote in my life. Okay. Revelations of the Red Pill. It took me I think I did it in 6 weeks or something like that. And it's got, I don't know, whatever, 100 and something pages. And I go, okay, great. But you don't write a 116-page document. And I don't care if you're just pulling stuff and you're editing it down. You don't do it overnight. This was a planned point out there. And I think people just can't see it, that it was pre-planned and given a long time ago.
Yes, and just to put things in proper perspective, the budget process for the 1,547-page bill actually started in the spring of 2022.
Yeah.
So they're putting things together based on what they perceive the need to be at that time period. And then they go through and they get within the department itself, they have an Office of Budget and Policy. They'll work through and put some preliminary drafts together. They ask their staff to fill in the drafts, expand the budget. It comes back to them and they review it. It goes to the director, then it comes back and they review it again. Then once it's done, it goes to Office of Management and Budget, who has their crack at it. They take a look at it and say, well, we can manipulate this here or this there. That's duplication of something in a different department, but that's okay. We can justify why that's there. Once that's done, then it goes over to the House and the Senate for their budget committee staff to take a look at it. In the meantime, they're communicating with administrative state people, with lobbyists, with anybody else that may have an influence in that. So they're putting that budget together. And by the time you get to the continuing resolution, you've got 1,547 pages.
Right.
That's how that gets there.
It's just one of the more fascinating ways of looking at this. And you're just saying, how does this work this way? And I think we so miss the information here with that too. So,
yes.
Okay. Sorry. I know.
Can I add one other thing on that too?
Yeah,
what people don't realize is if you take a look at the average budget for a department, Health and Human Services, for example, agriculture, or any of the other cabinet level positions, in the opening paragraphs of the budget, it will give the secretary of that cabinet office the opportunity to reduce the budget of that office by up to 9% and just not spend the money, just keep it and not use it for anything. And so they have already some built-in opportunity to reduce that budget and return the money back to the Treasury. So there
Well,
are built-in things that you can use to adjust government already.
well, I mean, and I'm going to use this as an example because I was listening to the audiobook. Is Government Gangsters by Cash Patel, and he stipulated that when he was in Office of DNI, which is National Intelligence, all they are supposed to be as a gathering of all the intelligence and send it up the food chain. And he made a comment that when he took this over, or he was undersecretary with that, and he took it over, he said, there was these things called open seats. And they started looking in on it. I think it was Rick Grinnell and he were looking in on it going, wait a second, you have an open seat for a guy you're never going to hire. And that's, at whatever their average of, 6-figure average per seat. And they had dozens and dozens of seats all over the place. And you're going, where does that, and by the way, that is from all the 650 3-letter agencies doing that.
Yes, and if you take a look at that, that is repeated all the way across government. That is repeated throughout state government. That's
Right.
in local government. If you look closely at their budgets, they always have positions that are identified as approved but unfilled.
Right.
And they keep those there just in case they need something. They've got to hire a friend, they need to fill a position for something. Or if they're told you got to make a budget cut, they give those seats up. Because that
Right.
way it's a budget cut that's not going to impact their overall activities.
Or just slush fund and move wherever they want to go.
Yes.
Give bonuses and those. I mean, I got to tell you, when I was working on the Oklahoma state budget, kind of trying to kill off sales tax, a hearing aid sales tax, which is only at the time 1.4 million of a $4 billion budget. And this was in 2006 through 2009. And I wrote everyone in the state, and I got it all. I mean, not me only, but I was watching this sucker go through several iterations, like 3 or 4 years. And I'm going, it's 1.4 million of a $5 or $4 billion budget, and it would never pass. And it was because it had little earmarks on there and just ways that they do this. But and they always say, well, they don't have enough money in the budget. And the answer is, if people like the Doge, and by the way, there's an Oklahoma Doge that's occurring right now as we speak. Those things are going to filter through all the states with it too.
Yes, they will. And again, on the hearing aid sales tax, they will tell you if you cut it by this percentage point, you're going to impact this program over here, which is in a different department, because everything is a web tied together. So that's the justification they use for preventing a cut.
And I mean, I'll tell you this one. I mean, we are the only state in the union that has sales tax on a medical device that you can write off on your income tax. And I kept bugging on this issue, and it would always die in committee or die with the governor until I realized that 75% of the money went toward firefighters' pension and 25% for a teacher pension. And I'm going, so you steal from these people to give to those. And I'm like, make a fund for a firefighter, pension, whatever, and bring it from the firefighters in essence. And yet they just cross over, and the wires are so messed up with that too.
Yes, and that's why they do that. When they're putting this together, looking to assess a tax on something, they want to find a benefit for it. So if someone is in the legislature trying to convince them to do a tax, if you can identify a valuable source like a firefighter pension, police pension for the money to go to, they're all there. They'll pass it because they believe it's going to be a benefit.
It's a sacred cow. They won't ever let it go,
Yes.
With that kind of thing too. Yeah. Sorry. Okay, guys, I know we got off on that, but it's such a fun part, but that's part of that fraud issue that kind of comes in. So we've sort of answered the elected, elected and non-elected, but, do we prove, or do we have to prove this part here? Because that's probably one of the bigger things that people bring up. Well, yeah, but the courts, knocked it down. 40 or 50 courts said no to Trump on that point.
Well, I think the important part here for people to understand is that when you have proof of election fraud and you can document the fact that the machines were manipulated
Right.
and that the votes were manipulated based upon the ballots that were input, the
Right.
minute you pull all those people out of office, and again, if these people are arrested for election fraud, then the next argument is, okay, so what happens to all the decisions they made, all the laws they passed and everything else? Those become invalid. It's no
Right.
different than a judge who was taking a payoff during a case, finding someone guilty. It's void against public policy. The same thing would happen here. And so you go back and you've got to unwind all of those different things that took place over that time period. The question becomes, how do you prove the fraud? You've got evidence of it. And by evidence, I'm talking about the fact that when Donald Trump says we have it all, they have it all.
Right.
They have the communications going back and forth that took place for the flipping of the votes. They have identified the machines and the tallies that flipped in real time. So they have all that information. And the question becomes, how do you refute that? You can't refute that. It's there. It's evidence against you. So what happens is all those people that benefited from that are out of office. The next question becomes, they got to give up their money. How do they get rid of it if they don't have it? Well, then they have an obligation against the government for obtaining money under false pretenses because they were not elected as a state representative, senator, councilman, whatever it might be, member of Congress. So then they're in a situation where, again, they committed election fraud and they lose their assets.
Right.
And it's everything they have, because how can you separate out, well, my salary as a senator went here and there, but it didn't go there. And then you roll into the Securities and Exchange Commission and all the illegal tax trading, stock trading and everything else. I mean, it becomes a rather large issue to try and work through.
Right. And you've been already answering. That's why I brought this up on the screen, so you guys know that he's already kind of dealing with this. Is that basically everything they pass down is null and void, and we're going to see an easy strip away of these situations. I mean, it's just going to be like, it's almost going to be like, sorry, but I'm not going to rip my book here, but it's like going into my book and going, I'm just taking a razor blade to hold pages of the book, and are all gone.
It's like taking down wallpaper,
Right.
You just pull it off the wall and expose what's underneath it.
Strip it off there, buddy. And I think that's really the case with that too. Okay. So let's move into this next one. So who overturns the edicts and how long might those take?
Well, and again, it's dependent upon the fact that I'll give you an example. So you have the sealed indictments. People get arrested. So, for example, you arrest a governor of a state, and that governor of the state is arrested and tried for treason. Governor, lieutenant governor, attorney general, secretary of state, whomever may be at the top. Okay, those people are taken out. Then you're going to have someone go forward and file suit against every act that they signed into law.
Oh,
all it takes is a decision saying, yeah, they stole their office to get there. They were not there legally, so therefore everything they signed becomes invalid. And then once that happens, of course, then you take a look at all the members of the legislature that were involved in it. Many of them, if they haven't been picked up, they will resign their office. And they will want to get rid of all the ill-gotten gain because they want to try and make a good faith effort that they're not as evil as people are going to accuse them of being. So you will have, I believe, a mixture of those types of things. And I believe once this starts, it will go relatively quickly. We're not going to have long, drawn-out court cases where people are going to want to appeal and go through the process because it's a military tribunal. And once those become aware to the public,
Well, related to that, so I mean, I'm not trying to. I know I'm interrupting you. I'm sorry there, but related to that point, can you step back from that one and just kind of hit it a little harder? So, I mean, the whole point of going back to a constitutional republic and going into what we're accomplishing here and seeing all this stuff is you got to fix the COVID, you got to fix the election, and you got to fix the child trafficking. So if you're underneath the railroad tracks of one of those, let's just say, for an election issue, as you just said, and you had the governor and you had your little trail of idiots underneath them, and then you got a third of the legislator that was a part of that thing, but they've already proven it. So if they've already proven it, you don't really have to do a case, do you? What
Well,
am
the only reason I'm saying you would do a case is that, again, because we are a country of laws, we have a constitution, we would want things taken away from, we would want those laws invalidated. I
oh,
mean, so for example, if I use as an example a tax, if they pass a tax and it's invalidated, then the tax was illegally levied and therefore it has to be returned to the public from which it was taken. It would be like
right.
seizing a house because there was $530 of taxes due on it, but you're seizing the homeowner's equity. And if a
Yeah.
court comes back and says, hey, you can't do that, you got to give it back to them, then you have to return the equity in the home plus interest. So in other words, we're just trying to make the victims whole by going through that process. Now, you could easily have a government decree that that's going to happen. But, there's some people that would argue that, well, the better way is to go through and get a court to say, yes, we have to do that. But again, the problem is if we don't have any legitimate courts that can do it, then it becomes by edict. And then who makes that? Because again, even if we look at our Constitution at the federal level is divides our government into three branches. So we have
Right.
to use something there. And then many states have adopted what the federal government has as their state constitution. So again, that's one of the ways that could be dealt with. Are there other ways? I'm sure there are.
Yeah. So, I mean, and it's also possible, using your same analogy, from the governor all the way down to the people, and you got a third of the legislator, which easily could happen. What might occur for those is they might just go, "Oh, fine, I give up," and you get like one of two or three different options. I mean, if you want to fight this, you're talking treason, and this is what it's going to be. But you can plea your way down to this, and basically, it's federal prison for an incredible long time frame.
Yes.
And it's like, and you lose everything anyway. You're always going to lose everything. But I've like I've said to about a couple, I've said this for about 2 or 3 years at least. I've said, some of these people, they're going to hope to be mopping a floor in McDonald's. I mean, that's the best they could ever hope for.
Yes, if that. And I think for the vast majority of these people, they're going to be in a situation where they're going to want to try and be as free of their wrongful acts as possible. It's like a bank robber. He sees his two accomplices get arrested. He wants to give them the money back because he doesn't want to get caught in it, but he had the money. So, and he was part of the conspiracy. And I think what we need to look at is that as people are trying to free themselves and their conscience of what they've done,
Correct.
how far and how fast do they do that? The other part of it is we have a government bureaucracy that's been involved in the taking of the resources as part of the fraud.
Right.
What happens with them? So you have folks there that will lose jobs, lose opportunities, and the money will come back to the people. So the question becomes, how far down does that go? And some of these become really complex questions. If somebody has a job and says, look, I was just doing my job as a state employee, I didn't do anything wrong. I just processed the taxes. Well, yeah, that's true. They just processed the taxes and it was a job for them. But if the whole process implodes, they're now out of a job.
Right.
So we, at least for people like that, have to offer retraining, new opportunities. And again, depending on what Nacera is going to bring along, for a lot of these folks, there may not be a need for any of that.
Right. The reality is, I mean, I think we want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. And the reality is, you got a lot of functionaries that were doing the job. But you know what? The reality that most people, I'm going to say this because, your conscience is a really powerful thing. And unless you're a psychopath or sociopath, you know when it's wrong. And most people kind of sit there and go, you know what? I'm not doing this anymore. I'm done. And they quit their job because they go, I've got to divorce my way from that, from that situation. And I think when you see that, I mean, I think that's happened over and over again. We're seeing a level of that no one's ever really talking about. But I think we've already seen a lot of that. Now, in the next phase, you'll see people just strip away and go, I quit. And when they kind of look at what they did, they go, fine, you quit, but you're not working in government again.
Right. And so it's a situation of where you have to let your conscience be your guide. And if they get to the point of where they realize that a lot of the things they were doing, they might have had some suspicion that it might not have been the best, but now that they're beginning to know, they want to move away from that and they want to find something different to do. And I think you're going to have that with a lot of the employees who are told they have to come back to work. Moving from their locations back to DC to go to work, they're going to say, "Wait, this time is as good as any. I'm going to have to back away."
Right.
And I think you're not only going to see that with the federal level, but also with the state level. And so as a lot of these adjustments take place, I think it's going to be a little bit easier to respond to the question of how do we fix this? If we have less hoops to go through to fix it, it becomes easier to fix.
Right. So I think, and now we sort of have talked about this one, I'll bring it up here anymore. We're not just going to talk, what happens with those injured by the fake laws. I know I'm not just talking, and we sort of dealt with this a little bit from the vaccine level, but there are people who, had laws, used against them, like the J6ers or other ones. I mean, J6 people just put a $50 billion lawsuit together. And it's in essence, it looks like a class action. And I'm like, go baby. This thing is going to tip over. I think that was one of the more powerful revelations I just saw today.
Yes. Well, and see, again, I have a difference of opinion from a lot of people. They say, well, pardon the J6ers. It's like, no, you don't want to go there. Void the conviction, because what the voiding does, a pardon leaves the conviction on your record. Voiding it makes it go away forever, and then pay you for your injuries, pay you for your losses, pay you for interest on those, and then provide you the opportunity for the adjustment in your life that you would have had that never occurred. But the people who are responsible for creating that, they need to be held personally, financially, and criminally liable for that, because what they did is they used the law for their own personal gain. And what they did is they harmed a lot of people. To me, they are no different than a Fauci by what they did. And so they need to be paying the highest price. Treason might be a good start.
Well, I mean, and guys, as we're kind of ending up here with this, I just love Roger, and Roger, we're gonna have to do this again. We'll come up with more new fun ones out there as well. But I will tell you, I'll give you a story, and I remember seeing this in 2020, and it was a little confusing. And there was like a Portland or Seattle riot. I mean, one of those two areas that was happening in the summer of love of 2020. And there's some of the people that were coming home from their rioting, right? And there's a black van, and I'm watching this video. And I wish I still had it. They drive up in the black van, and it's definitely military kind of guys. They're not hooded, but they have everything but it. They're all in black. They're really tough looking guys. They drag a dude off of the 3 or 4 people walking there. They rip him up and they got him in the van, and it's not even a 20-second job. And then they shoot off at the night, and you're going, what was that? And when you listen a little bit of the tape, they were part of whatever riot was happening, which one of those cities. And one of the things that I will tell you, and I've been noticing that, in my area, in my house area, one of the most powerful times to do that is in incredibly late times of the night, just like what happened to Roger Stone. You do it at the late hour, those 3, 4 in the morning timeframes. And this is when you're picking them off. So don't believe that this hasn't been happening all along in many levels.
Yes, and for a lot of communities around the country, in addition to the dark vans that pick up people who could either be a ringleader or they could be an FBI plant.
Right.
You also have helicopters stopping at a lot of locations.
Yep.
In multiple areas, people have reported helicopters landing for a while and then taking off again. When they land and take off, they got to be picking up somebody.
Yeah.
Or they got to be dropping somebody off to pick up later. I mean, these types of things are happening. And so unless you see it and unless you can identify it, you're left to wonder about what's there, but 9 times out of 10, they are there to retrieve people that either have arrest warrants for them or they were planted and they're there to retrieve them because they've
Right.
gotten all the evidence they need to go after the other people that were part of the process.
And you know, I mean, a housing division, I mean, that isn't even close to a military area. And listen, I've been here since 2017. It didn't start happening until around 2021 here. And it just goes right over my house. And because I'm up at 3 or 4 in the morning, I hear them all the time.
Yes.
And I'm like, and you can tell the difference of a non-military helicopter, you know, that's just flight for life kind of thing. And the military ones, they are big suckers and they're super low to the ground. And you're going, you have got to be kidding me, you know? And that is also probable why you haven't heard about all this stuff too.
Yes, I would agree with that. And I would also say for folks that are curious, if you have like a flight tracker app on your phone and you hear helicopters out there and you quick check it for commercial and you find out it's not on there, it's military. That can confirm the presence of military in case you need it. So,
Right.
but you know, it's kind of interesting because those things are happening a lot. And many times you'll even see state police helicopters flying around in the area, which do show up on your flight tracker, and they're tracking down people and they're running some interesting patterns. When they start hovering over cell towers, which I've seen a lot of that happen in areas, they are looking at picking up communications that are going on. And so they're listening in on the cell phone conversations because they can go over with the technology they have and they can pick up a drop on a cell phone tower for conversations that took place over the last several hours.
Right.
And then they have the opportunity to go through those and see what's going on in the ground. So there's a lot of government surveillance that's taking place that people may not be aware of. They hear these noises that wakes them up in the night, but they're not really certain what it is, but that's what it is.
And again, guys, you should be excited because if you have heard this kind of stuff, which I'm pretty darn positive almost everyone's heard them. And but they didn't know what they were listening to. And it's only happened since about 2020-ish and beyond. Something's going on. And guys, be encouraged because this cannot just be like it starts the day after an EBS. It's been going for a long time. You'll just see the finality of it on, you know, post EBS in essence.
Yes. And I'd like to draw one other thing into the conversation too. It's kind of off topic a bit, and maybe we should save it for a future date. But one of the interesting things that President Trump has been talking about, no tax on tips. He's been talking about no tax on bonuses, commissions, things of that nature. And in 2020, he was actually looking at suspending payroll taxes for a period of time.
Right.
And what's interesting is the president does have the constitutional authority to suspend laws.
Right.
And so he could actually come in and suspend the laws, and then Congress would have an opportunity to vote whether or not that is a correct suspension. Well, in 2011, we actually had a time period where they did suspend payroll taxes for a period of time.
Yep.
And that was during the Obama years. And the Congress and the president both agreed to do that. So when it comes to the conversation about taxes and the impact of some of the proposals that President Trump has put out there, those are closer to reality than people realize. And they can be done a couple of different ways. And so if you want to, we can get into that further in an upcoming conversation.
Oh,
but
yeah.
I think what people need to do is they need to realize that they've got to be hopeful about what's the potential is out there, because there are a lot of things that are going to take place. Some of them are not going to happen overnight. Others will. But it's going to be a process that once we start, it's going to flow forward and life will improve for everyone.
Yeah, it's going to be dominoes, guys. Now remember, your domino might be, several rows down the way here, but that sucker's coming down. And the reality is that, in any country, if 5% of the people rise up against them, I don't care what your group is, whether you're a communist nation or a fascist nation, it's coming down. And that's actually the job of America, just American citizens, is to say, no, you have been running roughshod over our Constitution, and that protects us. And the reality is so many Americans are, up in arms, and they're terrified of that.
They are. And, that's one of the reasons that the 1,547-page bill was pulled back, because everybody went to X.
Ballistic. Yeah.
They went nuts over it. And members of Congress, their switchboards were jammed by phone calls. Their X
Right.
accounts were flooded. Their emails were flooded. And they realized all of a sudden, you know what? They could easily be recalled from office.
Right.
So they made a decision to dump that. Plus, you had Elon out there saying, you know what? This is stupid. You got to do something better. And so that shows that America is beginning to take back its power by controlling the legislative branch and its government. And people just need to keep the pressure on. They need to follow that closely, and they need to make certain that they understand what their elected officials are doing, and not just at the federal level, but at the state and local level as well.
Right. That time is coming, guys. So as we finish up here, excuse me, as we finish up here, realize what Roger is in essence saying, and I've been saying this to you over and again, God's calling you to be reaching out. And what can you do in the next point of our government? What are you going to do? And maybe it's not, to be a state legislator or whatever that is, but maybe so. I always remember the one guy, he was down south of Houston, and he calls me on the phone. We're talking for a little while. It's got a heavy, strong accent, and it's in a small town in Texas. And he's complaining about the mayor, and he has very, very interesting points, really good statements there. And I said, well, what if God's telling you should be the mayor of your town? Oh no, I'm too old. I'm like, how old are you? I'm 68. Who cares, man? I think you could make a difference. But the reality is, ask God what you're supposed to do. And I think this is the thing that I've been calling over Roger. Roger's going to be able to come out and share with you, on a visceral level. And that's why I'm here, is going on that visceral level too. So thanks so much, Roger. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome, Scott. Really appreciate it. Till next time.
Yeah. And we'll hit that IRS one. That'll be a fun one.
Yes.
All right.
Okay.
Thanks so much.
You're welcome.